We closely monitored these aircraft, tracked the aircraft, intercepted the aircraft. Our forces are at the ready all the time, and we have very good surveillance capabilities.
The night began like any other in the vast skies above Alaska. Passenger planes crisscrossed the polar routes. Cargo aircraft hauled supplies toward Asia, and air traffic controllers in Anchorage monitored the skies with calm precision. It was a routine shift, the kind of night where the most exciting event might be rerouting a flight around unexpected weather. Then, at precisely 7:42 p.m., everything changed. The order came through so suddenly, so sharply, that for a brief moment, no one in the Anchorage control tower spoke. The voice over the secure line was direct, commanding, and completely devoid of hesitation. Shut it down. All of it. Within seconds, the weight of that order sank in. Shut it down? That meant every flight, every route, every inch of airspace above the largest state in America was to be sealed. Anchorage controllers looked at one another, stunned. In their entire careers, none had ever received such a directive. Partial closures happened during emergencies or military operations. But in order to close the entire airspace of Alaska, unheard of. Phones lit up. Controllers relayed instructions to pilots mid-air. Flight crews were told to divert some toward Anchorage, others toward Fairbanks, and some rerouted all the way back toward Canada. On screens inside the tower, tiny blinking dots representing commercial aircraft began shifting, looping away from their paths. It was as though an invisible curtain had suddenly been drawn across the sky. Inside airports, the ripple was immediate. Departure boards in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and smaller regional hubs flicked from on time to delayed to canceled. Confusion swept through packed terminals. Passengers looked up in disbelief. Parents tried explaining to restless children why they wouldn't be boarding their plane. A businessman shouted into his phone, "They've grounded everything, yes, everything." In the corner, a woman muttered the question no one wanted to ask out loud. "Are we under attack?" Outside, runways glowed eerily beneath the winter. Night jets that should have been lifting into the sky sat still, their lights flickering but engines silent. Alaska's skies, normally alive with the hum of traffic, were quiet. And that silence carried a weight, a heaviness. It settled over everyone like a shadow. Far from the terminals, in a NORAD operations center buried within reinforced walls, the true reason for the shutdown was unfolding. Radar operators stared. At their glowing screens, where a single anomaly had appeared without warning, it was a blip unlike any they had seen before, large, fast, and unpredictable. At first, a few dismissed it as atmospheric interference, perhaps caused by unusual Arctic weather. But when the object began to move, all doubt evaporated. The target didn't behave like an aircraft, and it didn't follow a straight trajectory or maintain a consistent speed. Instead, it darted, accelerated, paused, then shifted again, covering impossible distances in the span of seconds. One operator leaned toward the screen, whispering almost to himself, "That's not a plane." Another, trying to sound more rational than he felt, muttered, "Maybe hypersonic, maybe Russian." But the silence that followed betrayed the truth. These were men and women trained to recognize everything in the sky, and what they were seeing defied all of it. Meanwhile, pilots still airborne began reporting strange disturbances. A captain approaching Anchorage radioed, "Control, I've got interference on my instruments. My autopilot disengaged without command." Seconds later, he added, his voice taut, "Something just crossed my nose. I can't track it. It's gone." But it wasn't gone. Back in the radar room, the anomaly flickered. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished completely. 30 tense seconds passed. Operators scoured their screens. And then, like a ghost, it reappeared. But now hundreds of miles away, hovering above the Bering Sea. Gasps echoed in the room. The leap it had made was impossible, breaking every rule of flight and physics, the operators knew. Secure phones rang off the hook. Pentagon officials demanded updates by the minute. Commanders barked orders, voices strained but controlled. The word unidentified passed between desks. But no one dared say the letters that everyone thought UFO. The atmosphere in the radar room thickened with dread. Some operators leaned back in their chairs, their eyes fixed but unblinking. Others scribbled notes furiously, trying to document the impossible. And through it all, one question pulsed in the air like static. What is that thing? For those watching the screens, the nightmare wasn't just what the object could do, was what it might do next. And then, as quickly as before, the blip jumped. This time, it wasn't over the sea. It was inland, inside Alaskan airspace. And moving fast, the skies above Alaska had gone silent. But silence didn't mean safety, it meant something was coming, something unknown. And whatever it was, it had just crossed the line. The skies over Alaska have always carried whispers. Whispers of things that shouldn't exist. Long before the airspace shutdown that silenced Anchorage in stunned disbelief, strange tales had been sewn into the fabric of the North. It came from pilots with decades of experience, military men trained to read instruments with calm precision, and even civilian witnesses who swore they saw the impossible. The most infamous of these stories came on a frigid night in 1986, when a Japan Airlines cargo plane reported being followed chased even by something that no aviation manual could explain. The flight was Japan Airlines 1628, Boeing 747 carrying wine from Paris to Tokyo, rerouted through Anchorage for fuel. Captain Kenju Terayuchi was no amateur. He was a veteran pilot with over 10,000 hours in the sky, the kind of man who knew how to distinguish between a weather balloon and a mirage. But as the plane crossed over central Alaska, Terayuchi and his crew saw lights. At first, two small orbs. Harmless. Then those lights grew larger, brighter, and suddenly, they weren't distant stars, but objects moving in formation, objects pacing the 747's every turn. The crew described them as glowing discs, flashing and darting, with unnatural agility. One minute they were beside the cockpit, the next they streaked forward as though gravity held no meaning. The captain's hand shook as he called air traffic control, begging for confirmation. Was anything else out there? Anchorage controllers hesitated. For a moment, the radar showed nothing. Then an echo. A massive blip, dwarfing the 747, appeared, trailing behind them. The pilot would later say it looked like a giant mothership, the size of two aircraft carriers. For nearly an hour, the objects followed the jet, ignoring every evasive maneuver. Finally, as abruptly as they had appeared, they vanished into the night. Skeptics rushed to dismiss the case. Maybe it was ice crystals reflecting. Moonlight. Maybe radar interference. But what shook the world was the official admission. The Federal Aviation Administration held a press conference and confirmed that radar operators had, indeed, tracked an unidentified object alongside Flight 1628. The incident became one of the most well-documented UFO encounters in modern history and it happened right over Alaska. But that was far from the only story. Throughout the Cold War, Alaska's skies became a theater of shadows. Soviet bombers routinely probed American air defenses, skimming the edge of restricted airspace. Radar operators in dimly lit bunkers watched dots race across their screens, never quite knowing whether it was a hostile jet or something stranger. Sometimes fighters were scrambled, engines roaring across frozen runways. Sometimes the targets vanished before interceptors could even lock on. Pilots, both military and civilian, spoke in hushed tones about things they weren't supposed to see. Glowing orbs that danced over mountain ranges, triangular shadows that blotted out stars, objects that seemed to defy both speed and silence. To admit seeing such things was often career suicide. Men with years of service kept quiet, their reputations hanging by threads. And yet among themselves, they swapped stories like soldiers sharing ghost tales around a campfire. Contrast was everywhere. On one side, the skeptics. Meteorologists spoke of rare atmospheric conditions unique to Alaska's latitude. Astronomers dismissed sightings as planets low on the horizon. Aviation experts pointed to reflections, misread instruments, fatigue and long-haul pilots. There was always an explanation, always something ordinary to cover the extraordinary. But then there was the radar, cold, unblinking, and immune to imagination. And time and again, radar confirmed what human eyes swore they saw. Objects moving at thousands of miles per hour, objects stopping on a dime, hovering in impossible stillness. Objects vanishing and reappearing across vast distances in seconds. For decades. Those who monitored the skies over Alaska felt a gnawing truth that no official report dared print. Something was up there, something beyond politics, beyond the Cold War, beyond human engineering. And those skeptics clung to their weather balloons and atmospheric illusions. One refrain echoed louder than any denial. Radar doesn't lie. And in Alaska, radar has been screaming for decades. Under the midnight sky of Alaska, silence carried an unusual weight. The shutdown order had rippled through air traffic control like a shockwave. And by the time radar screens blinked with the impossible target, the Pentagon had already placed a call to NORAD. Within minutes, a protocol designed for the gravest emergencies was triggered. Scramble the Raptors. The thundering roar of F-22. Engines broke the quiet of Elmendorf Air Force Base. Pilots moved with practiced urgency. But even for these men and women trained for war, the atmosphere was different. They weren't suiting up for Russia. They weren't preparing for China. They were flying into the unknown. Tanker aircraft followed, their sole purpose to keep the Raptors fueled for a pursuit that no one could predict the length of. On the ground maintenance crews stood in hushed silence, some whispering that the entire operation felt more like a scene from a movie than a drill, as the Raptors climbed into the dark Arctic sky. Residents across Anchorage and Fairbanks felt the earth tremble with the sonic booms. Windows rattled in small towns. Dogs howled. Social media lit up with confused posts. One viral clip came from a college student outside her dorm, the camera shaking as she whispered, "That's not thunder, it's jets, fast jets." Within hours, the video would be replayed millions of times, her voice echoing the unease of an entire nation. Inside the cockpits, pilots switched to encrypted channels. Their voices were clipped, urgent, yet tinged with disbelief. Target locked on radar, moving east. Speed inconsistent. Another pilot cut in, his tone strained. "It's not responding. Repeat, it's not responding." That single phrase leaked later, becoming a headline that the Pentagon tried and failed to smother. Meanwhile, on the ground, the public pieced together fragments of the story. Passengers trapped inside Anchorage International filmed empty skies and deserted runways, their posts carrying a surreal mix of annoyance and dread. No flights, no explanation. Whole airport shut down, one man wrote in frustration before. His comments section flooded with speculation, terror attack, spy balloon, even aliens. Hashtags like hashtag silent skies and hashtag Alaska lockdown trended by the hour. But for those in the air, speculation wasn't an option, it was survival. The Raptors, closed in, radar pings showing the object drifting north, then abruptly vanishing before reappearing dozens of miles away. Every maneuver defied the laws of aerodynamics. 1 second it moved sluggishly, the next it accelerated with a burst no afterburner on Earth could match. "It's playing with us," a pilot muttered under his breath, though he didn't key. His mic to admit it. At NORA's command center, eyes were glued to massive screens. Commanders weighed the unthinkable. Authorize weapons? Fire on something they couldn't even categorize? The rules of engagement had never contemplated this scenario. Yet in the tense room, the chatter slowed, replaced by the pulsing beep of radar echoes and the realization that their best aircraft might not be fast enough. Suddenly, the object pulsed forward on the radar, a streak that leapt hundreds of miles. In seconds, pilots strained against their harnesses, throttling up, but they were chasing a ghost. From the ground, residents swore they saw flashes rip across the northern sky, as though lightning had torn sideways across the horizon. Some even filmed faint glimmers darting above the clouds, clips later dissected frame by amateur. Sleuths convinced they had captured first contact, and then, Silence. The object was gone. It's not shot down, not destroyed, just gone. The pilots circled, scanners wide open, instruments worry with static. Controllers barked coordinates. But every recalibration led to nothing but empty air. In the frozen night over Alaska, the most advanced fighters on Earth had been outrun by something that shouldn't exist. And as they returned to base, a question echoed not just in the cockpits, but across the nation. If it wasn't ours, and it wasn't theirs, then whose skies are we really flying in? On radar screens, the world is supposed to make sense. Every blip, every echo has a signature, a rhythm, a logic. Commercial airliners glide along predictable corridors, their transponders chirping like beacons in the night. Military jets slice through with sharper, quicker trails, their profiles distinct, but still bound by the same physics. Weather balloons drift, satellites arc, meteors streak and vanish. To the trained eye, the sky is a tapestry of patterns. But on that night, the tapestry tore. The first reports from Anchorage weren't just strange, they were impossible. Operators watched the anomaly appear as if from nowhere. A massive return on Doppler radar that seemed too sharp to be weather, too fast to be a conventional aircraft. Doppler radar doesn't just show position. It reveals movement, velocity, direction. It paints the skies with color-coded truth. Yet here was an object that broke the color spectrum, racing across the grid, then stopping dead as though inertia meant nothing. One veteran controller leaned in, squinting at the jagged data. He knew the basics better than anyone. Radar cross-section. The measure of how detectable an object is depends on size, shape, material. Stealth aircraft are engineered to scatter signals, to appear smaller, or to vanish altogether. But this target wasn't stealthy. It wasn't small. It returned a signature. That was, paradoxically, to clean. Too sharp. Almost as if the